Gentlemen, thanks very much for being here today. Appreciate your time. Matt, I want to start with you. One of the things that we've heard both from Larry and from Rich is about the way that agencies are assembling large amounts of data. What are the best practices that you've seen for those agencies to then curate that data and make sure that it gets disseminated to the places that they want to deploy it?
Absolutely, yeah. So both commercially and in the government, what we're seeing is big transformation. Younger employees, more employees, they are hungry for data. And so what that requires is an aggregation of that data virtually, right? We want to be able to federate across different agencies. So that requires change management. The two big things that these agencies are doing and need to do more of is first is classification. It's not very sexy, but understanding what is this data. In the intelligence community, we understand it's top secret, it's secret, right? But in federal civilian agencies, we don't necessarily have that. So we have to classify our risk tolerance. And making that simple. So, and then that gets to the second thing, which is who can approve access, right? As we lower the technical challenges of no one needs to write code anymore to get access to raw data. So what you need to know is what's the approval chain? Who can approve access to these amalgamated data sets? So we need to create those approval chains, which a lot of these agencies don't have yet. So we got to build those out. So classify the data, understand the risk tolerance, and assign the chains of approval to get access to this data. And that allows the third, which is most important, is give access, but also got to take it away. So how do I monitor it all, right? And so being able to dynamically take it under control again. So those are kind of the three big things we're seeing as best practices as they move forward in this new world of AI and democratized data access.
Dan, you're nodding your head enthusiastically at a couple of those points. What resonated with you?
Yeah, so when we think about the modern data stack, so you think about your pipelines, you're moving data from left to right. You're thinking about your metadata, which is your data about the data. You're thinking also really about, Matt said, the observability is the health of my pipeline. What data is moving and is the data moving successfully? And then you're thinking about the access, the data product. Hey, I'm a user, I want to run a report, I want to generate a model. And so then now you're thinking about your data product. But sandwiched sort of in the middle in there is what you call the semantic layer. And that's really the mission understanding of the data. So while all of those parts of the modern data stack have emerged and are evolving, that semantic layer is still an area where I see industry having to spend a lot more time as well to complement all the things that Matt said, because really that's really how your data is used, who's using it, what data you need, and really defining the interoperability and the interdependencies across those sets.
Austin, welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to follow on to that. I agree 100%. So we consolidated all of our data in the cloud, or at least all of our analytics data in the cloud. And the first thing that we're trying to do is establish a semantic layer that sits on top, because it's great to have your data machine readable. It's better to have it machine understandable. So we're spending a lot of time, focusing on the definitions of different fields, on the relationships and so on, so that we can combine all of the data in useful ways to have mission impact.
What are the main techniques that you wanted to make sure you did as you stood up the Office of CDO at the SEC?
Yeah, so the Evidence Act is now, I think, about 6 years old. So there's a lot of us in the community that have built up our offices through time. And we're kind of graduating from that elementary school age, maybe to middle school right now. But the Evidence Act has a number of responsibilities that it gave to chief data officers, including, the management of the data lifecycle, the management of data assets, ensuring that your agency maximizes the use of data, and so on and so forth. There's a whole list of them. And what I found is a lot of the CDOs did the same kind of systematic approach, where we took all of the responsibilities of the CDO and we tried to bucket that together into different areas. And then, at least in the SEC, the areas that I found that most resonated and that I basically set up as functions with functional leads and then governance committees underneath were the following areas. The first is strategy and use, really understanding where data can have the most mission impact in your agency. Second is data architecture, architecting data flows, the semantic data layer, if you're going that route, and so on. and then creating artifacts that you can use to make decisions and answer questions around data in your agency. That's extremely important. Third area is data governance. So you need to set up roles and responsibilities around data. That was just mentioned earlier. Classifying data based on its sensitivity, setting up individuals who are data stewards who can grant access and so on. And then the final area is data services, providing services to the agency around the consumption of data, understanding data, so on and so forth. Those four areas tended to map on pretty well to the responsibilities of the Evidence Act, and quite a few other CDOs set up very similar kinds of structures.
How much of what you encountered as you compare notes with your fellow CDOs across government was different than what they experienced, and how much of it was similar, given that sounds like you use similar taxonomies?
Yeah, so I was surprised at how similar our approaches were. I think the main differences were around whether or not your agency gave certain responsibilities to the CDO, or whether those were still with the CIO, or whether they happened in other parts of the agency. So in each area, for example, with data architecture, you oftentimes have your own enterprise architect. How does that relationship develop, and then what are the responsibilities of one versus the other? Same with data strategy. Oftentimes there's analytics groups, or perhaps somebody in charge of analytics in your agency. There's touch points there. To the extent that there isn't, sometimes CDOs fill in. So it's really about, I think, the scope of the CDO at each agency as opposed to those functional areas.
Matt, you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation the similarities in what the people using data in the commercial sector versus the government sector, what their demands are. Do the structures that Austin just talked about sound the same? Do they sound familiar based on what you've seen in the commercial sector versus what you see in the government sector?
Absolutely, it's identical, to be honest. Whether you're running clinical trials and the controls are what they call blinding to get through the FDA cycles, it's the same thing as access rights within the government, right? You have domains of data, and then you have subdomains of data, and each of those have requirements on control. And so they have to go through approval workflows, just like we do in the government, right? We have memorandums of agreement. They have, SLAs and SLOs, right? So it's very identical in the constructs of it. But I think one point that was brought up that I think is very important, which is in commercial, and we're now seeing more and more of it in the government as these CDOs proliferate across our government post that federal act, is it's a team sport. So you have to decentralize governance, but then there's a corporate governance element which goes to the CDO, but they have to work with IT, and they have to work with security, and they have to work with legal. Access to data and use of data is not just a data office or data platform team problem. It's a team sport. And I think we're having to modernize our workforce and our tools to be able to allow that symbiotic relationship across those groups without being stovepiped on decisioning.
Among those I think I counted 4 different areas there. Among those 4 seats at the table, are there places where you've seen relationships that maybe tend to hang up more than others? Do you see relationships among those that are really super important relative to the others? Or is it pretty much all equal all the way around in your?
No, I wouldn't say tenuous is the right word. I think it's the level of sophistication at the business level. Like a lot of times what we find is that enterprise data owners within, let's just say, a mission directorate or a business unit, they really know their data. And the governors assigned there, they've got 20, 30 years experience knowing the gray area is what I call it. How do I get through the legal authorities to make this work, to get the job done? Enterprise, which, they don't know it as well. So they have to work together and figure that out. And so that's where I see the strain is we have too many data sets coming in with too many people who need access to it to allow the domain experts to scale. Mm-hmm. And so what enterprise needs to do is figure out how do we utilize AI to scale them? Because you can't hire people with 20 years experience and hire hundreds of them. So that's where we're seeing the strain is less on the groups working together. It's more how do we help these people scale as their mission becomes more critical to the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm. What are the most important tools that you've seen in that scaling effort?
So I'll start with patterns and then tools. I think I wanted to piggyback on a couple things that both Matt and Austin said around patterns. So about 15 years ago, as storage became cheaper, the industry moved towards this concept of a data lake. Mm-hmm. And that was great because you could pull everything in here, but then that new problems emerged. and the data lakes in some cases became data swamps. And it was, okay, how do we navigate all of these different files, different kinds of data variety in this data lake? And so emerging tools came out around open table formats, et cetera. But then, sort of to get to Matt's point, the data mesh pattern around, okay, maybe we kind of keep data where it is in some cases. We don't have to move everything into this lake. But then we also have to empower people, data owners that sit in those domains, that understand the data, that can assess the quality of it, that can weigh in on who should be accessing this data, how current the data should be, et cetera. So those kinds of patterns started to emerge. And there's complementary tools. You can't necessarily go out and buy a data mesh. It's a sort of organizational pattern. But now tooling came about to actually start to be able to scan that data, to provide sensitivity around the data, to be able to provide some perspective on how fresh the data is, what the data quality looks like. So Matt's company, Immuta, does a lot of that. There's plenty others. The CSPs provide some of that as well, and some of the data platforms. So there's a whole emerging tool set and ecosystem around that. But it's not just the tooling, it's also the patterns and the responsibilities of new emerging roles.
The word that I hear from both what you both just talked about that strikes me as important to somebody like Austin is strategy. And it strikes me that you have the framework of the federal data strategy that I imagine you paid a lot of attention to when you stood the office up and built all the things that you talked about building earlier. How did you go about driving a data strategy specifically for SEC, given you have a different mission than everybody else, you have a different infrastructure than everybody else, and so on?
Good question. So, I mean, honestly, data strategies are fairly similar. Now, it's the application of that strategy which is different in each agency or in each organization. But so overall, you have to have an idea of where you're going with data. You have to have an idea of what stories you want to tell with data. So that's the first thing. You have to have an area to do that. So you need some kind of an infrastructure in order to fulfill what it is you want to do with data. And then third, you need some rules around the data, which really enable the use, enable the organization of it, but then also protect the data and so on. So those are kind of the three main pillars of any data strategy. And like I said, it's really about the application of that strategy to your own organization. Within the SEC, I immediately took the data strategy and then worked with our data management board to set up initiatives that are meant to fulfill the strategy. And our initial focus was on insider trading detection. So we put together a team that looked at very large volumes of data. There's several reasons why we chose that. First of all, it requires an extremely large amount of data and working with a data set that's very, very large within the agency. So we knew that if we could tackle this problem, it would have a number of knock-on effects. So we put together a team. We had people who were really good at analytics, worked with those who were really good on the technology, and then also data individuals in between. And I have to say it was very successful. So that group found the largest instance of front running in markets that the SEC has ever found, based on just following the strategy, applying it to the mission of the agency, putting together a team, and then executing.
So it worked. And what are the knock-on effects then that you described that you expect to see?
Yeah, so we have a number of knock-on effects. First, our data engine in the SEC, the analytics platform, can handle any structured data that you throw at it, because we started with the most complicated set of data to begin with. Next, we were really concerned about data security. So we set up a lot of zero trust controls around the entire initiative, a number of knock-on effects in the agency around that zero trust effort, and so on and so forth. Just kind of across the entire board, we treated this initiative as the pilot for the way in which we wanted to do data management, data governance, data use in the agency, and applied it and applied that initiative in a way that we could scale.
Dan, and then Matt, we have about 30 seconds apiece left as we start to run out of time. What is the most important thing that you think people like Austin will see moving forward that they should prepare for today?
The appetite for more agentic AI, for more generative AI use cases. There's a lot of appetite to move into that space, and We don't want to inhibit innovation, and we don't want to inhibit progress. And at the same time, there's going to be a tremendous amount of rework if you do not have your semantic layer pulled together first.
Matt, what's ahead for folks like Austin in government?
Yeah, identities around agents, non-human identity management, all of your semantic layers, all of the metadata around managing access is going to be dependent on the management of those machines as identities.
Matt, Austin, Dan, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.